Have you ever been watching a sequel to your favorite movie and it wasn't as good as the first, and you're wondering what was the thought process at all? I'm sure a lot of you just agreed, especially those of you who know my channel and may have predicted that I'm talking about Toy Story. Now specifically for this video, I will be mostly using Toy Story as an example of this. Before I start, I do want to mention that there are chapters in this video if you do want to jump to a specific topic. When we mention a sequel, we're specifically talking about the continuation of a story, whether that means the second, after the previous, or waiting a few years in between movies. Fun fact, in 1916, The Fall of a Nation was the first film to ever have a sequel, following the first film, The Birth of a Nation. Now I'd like to look at the differences not in the story, but what critics had to say in comparison to the original movie. Toy Story versus Toy Story 4 is the best example. Sure, we know the characters, but how much story can you really tell with them? Usually when people claim the sequel is better than the original, it is because they are wrong and know nothing, says one researcher writer, James Guild. What this actually means is they believe that the story from the sequel should have been the first one they saw. Comparing the second to the first, one can be found as funnier and purely more entertaining to them than the first. Does that mean it's better? Well, that's a complicating answer. No sequel or prequel can technically be better than the first if you look at the key points specifically about how a film is made. There are a lot of things that come into play: obstacles, characteristics, and everything in between. When we look at one film versus the extended story, in this case the second, third, and fourth, we are introduced to these characters and understand who they are, their choices, and most importantly, their personality. For a lot of sequels, adding characters audiences will latch onto should be a no-brainer for the studios. Often it's a way to give kids a new toy to buy, and that's surely Disney's original thinking with Forky. Original characters make unoriginal movies seem like brand new properties. And when we're in an era where franchises dominate and will continue to do so despite sequels seeming to be in trouble, that's something. Speaking of Forky, if we jump and compared Toy Story 1 to Toy Story 4, when it was announced, a lot of people were confused as to what else could happen, considering they ended the third in a way that seemed like they were closing a chapter and they couldn't come back. We were grateful for getting to see Bo Peep once again and learning her story, but being with a new owner just didn't feel right. Now, if we broaden our horizon and speak on something different than just Toy Story or Disney, think of Jaws or Son of the Mask, which to be honest, I didn't even know existed, and that's probably because of the reviews. Son of the Mask, if you guessed it, is the sequel to Jim Carrey's The Mask, and this film actually has the worst reviews I have ever seen from a film. To reference a few, sequels without their original stars are usually sent to direct-to-video. Some deserve better, this isn't one of those. And it's your usual low-budget, unbelievably bad sequel. We recognize that The Mask is a Jim Carrey classic. We know who Jim Carrey is, we know he can make us laugh, and he did. However, this quote-unquote sequel was created without him. The sequel is about a struggling animator who comes into possession of the mask and has some fun. On one night of fun with his wife, he unintentionally creates a child who inherited the mask's powers. Meanwhile, Loki is on the hunt to take back what's his. Many fans actually felt that the story lacked in development. In terms of how the mask is portrayed as an alternate persona, the sequel didn't do as well as a job. It's obvious that the mask isn't meant to look 100% human or realistic. The Carrey version has puke green skin and ginormous bulging teeth. In some way, it still had a realistic element due to the fact that it held onto normal facial features. The visual effects brought the Mask movie closer to realism, and Son of the Mask did the total opposite. You can get the gist of what I'm trying to say here. There wasn't a lot of thought process going into this one, and it shows. Now, if we switch sides for a minute so I'm not bashing every sequel, there are in some cases good sequels like Spider-Man as the best example, or the Rush Hour films. We can never get enough of Spider-Man nor Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker. Regardless of whether or not all sequels are cash grabs or not, you really do have to pay attention to the reviews to figure it out. For example, Rush Hour 2, even though the film is good and equally as well as the first, any film can be designed as a cash grab and you wouldn't even know it. Let's go back to Disney. Think of any Disney sequel and a lot of people will mention or somewhat believe that the sequels they make is for a cash grab. And you possibly agree with me too. Ultimately, it's up to you whether or not you believe if sequels are cash grabs. I guess it all depends on your take and your opinion and which franchise of film is talked about. I would like to mention my take on all this as a writer. Having placing as a quarterfinalist twice in a couple of competitions, as well as getting feedback from people in the film industry, I can say firsthand that I do understand what needs to be included in a story in order for it to be entertaining. Analysts look at various things: plot, character, setting, and if everything that happens sets up the next scene and makes sense and flows well and you don't stop and get confused about something all of a sudden, which I've made that mistake even without realizing. From what I know about storytelling, I can see why there are a lot of films out there that have cash grabs secretly written behind the title. On the flip side, I really do not believe in sequels. I for one believe that making sequels is a lazier way of storytelling. The characters are already created and the audience know who they are, so you don't have to introduce them again. But it loses originality. More people are drawn to firsts, as in first films. Think of it as a child making their first steps. You're excited for the first steps, but the next few, well, it's not all that exciting. Same with films. It should be one and done. But I do want to turn this around to you guys and ask what your take on sequels are. Do you think there are cash grabs, or do you think there is a broader purpose for sequels other than expanding on the story?